Hello, heroes and dreamers. I am Peaches, your host today on Campbell's Corner.
How would you advise somebody to tap that spring of eternal life, that joy that is right there?
Well, we're having experiences all the time, which may, on occasion, render some sense of this, a little intuition of where your joy is. Grab it. No one can tell you what it's going to be. I mean, you've got to learn to recognize your own depths.
Hello again. We're back. It's me. If you don't know me by now, too bad. Joking. It's Peaches. Surprise. I have a fantastic guest with me, Gena Timberman. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Peaches. It's an honor, a pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to sitting down with you in the studio and just happy to connect and share what I can.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. So today, listeners, special people, we're going to be talking about creation stories. There are so many. Let's dive in. I guess I'll go first and kick us off.
Please.
So I was agonizing about what creation story to talk about because I was like, again, there's so many different varieties. And all I could think of was my mom and dad. They both came from like Christian or Catholic backgrounds. Right. But we never went to church, never did any of that. So it was like I didn't really have that much of a connection with it. And they, it was passing like, oh, yeah, no, there's this. What's God? Oh, yeah, we talk about this. And he made it in 7 days. And I was just like, oh, okay. And then you grow up and you hear more. And then, but I wasn't really connecting with it. I like learning about them because they're interesting and they're all so different. And then I was like, but I don't know which one to share for this. So then I started thinking more and I was like, man, all I could think of was all the books I would read as a kid and all the fantasy books and all the, wizards and stuff like that. And then, because I'm a nerd and I go back to that. and any fantasy story worth its salt has a great creation story. So I was like, okay, let's go back to basics, go back to the greatest and the biggest, Mr. Tolkien himself from Lord of the Rings. So here is the Ainulindale, which I'm probably saying it wrong, but I tried really hard. Here we go. The Ainulindale recounts the creation of Arda, which is the name of the earth in fancy speak for them, by the deity Eru Iluvatar. The story begins with a description of the Ainur, which are sort of like angels, but not really. I'm not really sure what holy ones, I think, or something like that. As children of Iluvatar's thought, they are taught the art of music, which becomes the subject of their immortal lives. The Ainur sing alone or in small groups about themes given to each of them by Iluvatar, who proposes a great plan for them all, a collaborative symphony where they would sing together in harmony. Although the Ainur embody Iluvatar's thoughts, they are expected to use their free will to assist the development of the great plan. The most powerful of the Ainur, Melkor, is introduced to the music. Although his loud and vain music disrupts the harmony, Iluvatar stands, smiles, and raises his left hand to begin a new theme. When Melkor again spoils the second theme, Iluvatar raises his right hand sternly to begin a third. Melkor tries to corrupt this theme again with the volume of his music, but it is powerful enough to prevent him from succeeding. Iluvatar ends the music, chastises Melkor, and leaves the Ainur to their thoughts. And then after this, they basically, their music becomes so in sync and harmonized and beautiful that it creates the world, and then elves and dwarves and men pop up, and it's all great. And then some of them come down and are like, I actually kind of like this place. I think I'll stay. And, and then we get the grand tale that came from that.
Right. I love that story. I love how, because I think, because what was forming in my mind when you mentioned creation, stories of creation or origin, I was thinking of it from an indigenous cultural perspective, and I'm really grateful that you started out with that story because it gives a lens to the diverse way we can speak about thoughts and concepts of origin from the fantasy or fantastical and to these, different ways that we embrace creativity and different wonder about connection and the magical way in which we relate to the world around us. And it's thinking about that as like a bookend to many books and ways to talk about from many cultural, historic perspectives, from stories we learn from as kids, what we read in popular culture, stories that people will tell us about, like little creatures in the forest or other things.
Yeah. We've
and
talked
also,
about critters a lot here.
Right. Who doesn't like talking about
Right?
critters?
Bunnies and raccoons and everything.
You need any material, just talk about a critter.
Right.
And then to thinking of the other bookend on the other side of different perspectives and books as stories of origin or creation as these sacred ways of a narrative that are really important in terms of that are really show these stories that share more about science or these stories that show more about truth and science than they lend to myth or fantasy. And so there are so many different ways of looking at origins for many Native people, for indigenous cultures, and there are so many different origin stories. And I'll talk a little bit about ours and how it informs me today, but we can all gain something when learning an origin story, whether it relates to us or it's someone else's. It tells you so much about how one's worldview, how they could relate from an art perspective, culture. I was hearing that in the story that you were telling, the way that they organize that place in the world. And so for Choctaw people, I'll speak very broadly, and there are, different perspectives with a lot of origin stories, and I'll, share that. But for Choctaw people, the people that later became known as the Choctaw people, for ancient, from our origins, if you look at this large land base that was around, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, for our people, we were in the dark, and then there was this cave, and then we emerged into light out of this beautiful mound that was our mother mound, Nanawaya. And so knowing that origin story and in learning about that environment, and then later the story that comes after our origins, it's a very complex story, but in more recent times, the forced federal acts of removal that uprooted our people, dislocated, and we moved our people to what is now Oklahoma, that forced journey. And so that gives a lot of perspective about how we organize from ancient times, from leadership style, the relationship we have to animals, the relationship we have to one another in knowing that leaders from ancient times to present day had really difficult decisions to make to keep our people together. And that has enabled that narrative, cultural preservation, the narrative to continue, our stories to be told, and even the capacity now in a new land that, we got a sense of rebirth in what is now Oklahoma, and that is our home. Oklahoma even being, Choctaw, where's red people, and creating a place like the Choctaw Cultural Center to tell the story of how we came to call what is now Oklahoma home, but also to share our origin story through the exhibition. And so that really shares this continuum that is so important, I think, for all cultures of we have a traditional identity and a past and an origin. And there is this disconnected chain. Today, we are still expressing ourselves. And so those origin or creation stories, they really gave instructions or a framework for relating not just to the earth, but to this natural world, to the animals, and to one another. That I think is so important. I love the fact that you're sharing, this topic with the audience.
Yeah, and I think that creation stories, like you said, I mean, like the organization, the cultural ties that you get, like everything, each one is super important to that culture. And just by hearing that story, you get a good look into who they are as a people or
Right.
things like that. So like going back to the Lord of the Rings, I mean, it's
Right.
like you hear about just how he organized it, so to
Right.
speak, and then it really informs how even the characters in the book interact with each other. Like
Right.
music is super important in the speckled here and there throughout the
Right.
books, and it gives it that extra little bit of like, oh, this is real, this feels real. But then
Right.
I took me and Jazz and my mom. We went to the First Americans Museum.
Yay, yes.
When there was what was it, Digipop. That's what it was.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Jazz.
What an awesome,
It was so cool.
What an awesome program they
It was
put
so
on.
fun. Oh my gosh, we had a blast.
I'm
And
so glad you had fun.
it was so good. And we went into through the actual museum portion of it, and we sat in that room that was the big circular room that was telling the stories. And we didn't sit through the whole thing, but I looked at my mom because we were like, we wanted to see all the rest of the stuff, and we wanted to go back to Digipop and all this other thing. And I was like, I could sit in there and I could listen to those forever. I would happily listen to those stories for an hour or however long that it that it goes through all of the stories, it goes through quite a few.
Yes, it does. And it goes to 4. And, that was just an incredible part of I mean, there's so many special ways in which I could talk about the meaning of working on different aspects of the First Americans Museum from the 90s to now. But I'll tell you that Origins experience. So we had this exercise, which was a beautiful one, where the team went to every tribe and began conversations about, on this map of what is now the continent, this continent. But, can you place your point of emergence onto the earth? And that map in the gallery of just identifying just like these, kind of vague general areas are really cool. And the conversations that we would have with some very detailed stories, with others, understandably, not as detailed stories about the creation, origin, the emergence into this world. And that was a really beautiful experience, having those conversations and then going through and getting kind of these diverse stories from, the Caddo people of the earth. And, you brought up music. I think of, the Caddo drum, and how they talk about their story, and the voice of the people telling, and the songs that were in the language that comes into play when you learn an origin story. And then, the Oto people, the Oto Missouri people, and, you have the Yuchi people, and, there are many different Pawnee people. You begin to learn, oh, this is why the star knowledge is important. You learn about origin stories from a tribe. This is why, the relationship to the water to some people, the
Here's little
relationship to the
pieces that,
earth.
are important.
I mean, different ways in which other tribes will talk about, the animals and how, integral these animals. And you start to realize that is somewhat of that those instructions, that's framework of that's why they wear this with their regalia, or this is why that song is important. This is how different people express themselves through language. There are origin stories that are told for days, and just
And
to
they're all
know, just to
passed
have
through
that
the
blessing and
voice, yeah,
gift to be a
auditorially.
part of learning pieces and learning what we did in creating that space was really, really special. special, and I could sit through it over and over again. So I hope you do too.
I'm so excited to go back, and it's like, yeah, we
Right,
keep telling everybody
right.
about it. We're like, go there, go there. If you like museums and if you like to learn things, go.
Thank
So,
you.
and yeah, you two listeners, we're telling you, go.
Right,
You're in Oklahoma
right.
City, go see it.
Right.
But yeah, and it makes me think of, while you're talking, it was, I can't remember the story now, but it was a Mongolian story or something, but they pass down their traditions orally.
Right,
There we go.
right.
And there was this one that was talking about it's like this long ballad, and like speaking of singing for
Right.
days, this is like it goes on so long, and it keeps not changing, but it stays relatively the same, and it just depends on the person singing it and putting in their
Right.
flares and stuff. But it talks about why they have this particular violin. It talks about why they love horses. It talks about all the important things, and it's like
Right.
such unique, interesting stories. And I like too how I was trying to think too about how certain cultures, like I know like Western cultures have more of not a disconnect from nature, but kind of, because I was thinking about the story of Adam and Eve
Oh, right.
in the garden, and how they broke away from the garden, and how it became the fruit of knowledge is no
Right.
longer, it's something that they shouldn't,
Right.
and then after that it became more about connection to themselves and how they can control nature almost in a way, or like
Right.
conquer it.
Right.
Whereas like other origin stories are more like being literally birthed from
Right.
the earth, or connecting to it in some way. And there's Joseph Campbell, who this show is named after. He has a story, or I mean a TV show called The Power of Myth, and it's a great show. And he talks very in depth about there's a whole episode dedicated to creation stories.
Right.
It's a great listen,
Right.
or a read. It's also a book, but and he kind of goes into that distinction too about how, and again, it's just the snapshots of culture and how
Right.
it's totally different depending on where you go. But yeah, that's what I started thinking of. Like,
Right. And also that importance of faith, no matter what, spiritual, connection you have to the community culture, people around you, that sense of that trust, that's its own kind of natural democracy in and of itself, that natural power of, it's really beautiful to see that that continuing affirmation, reaffirmation that many, cultures, native and, indigenous cultures do to have that construct, that I don't know, that framework of tradition and ceremony that keep it present in life, whether it's through, a ceremony, dance, song, prayer, making, teaching, someone would say, a Choctaw elder said, they say we didn't have a written language, but, my mother, she was weaving this basket, and every part of that story she was telling to me about our people was woven into that basket. And so that becomes its own language. We talked about that oral tradition, but that story tradition lives on through different ways in which we express ourselves consistently in life.
interesting. I thought of rosary beads.
Right.
My
Yes.
grandma and my whole mom's side of the family had
Yes.
rosary beads, and I mean, you go through the rosary,
Right.
but it's like a different sort of hearkening to faith, because that seems more. I mean, it's, I guess, tied to the prayers, which is tied to the scripture, which is tied to traditions.
Right.
So it's like,
And
I mean,
belief systems. And belief systems.
but it's like, yeah, it's interesting how each culture has those different
Right.
callbacks to
Right.
those things in the different ways of
Right.
reminding ourselves of those different traditions.
it's a ways of respect. You know, we say this a lot, those relationships, you know, relationship to one another, relationship to the animals and the natural world, relationship to the creator, you know, relationship to, you know, the universe. And, you know, the respect that we show through different actions, activities, and honoring, ways in which we honor, the responsibilities that one has to protect and to continue. That's a part of that that continuum. You know, we are a part of this disconnected chain of the past and the future, and so you're part of that. And then, yeah, the reciprocity, that cyclical exchange of just giving and sharing. And, you know, someone said to me one time, it's like the you know, that your way, or you could say your community, your tribe, you know, it's like a body that you breathe it in, you breathe that identity, you breathe it in, you know, you can breathe in its different aspects of culture, community ways, you know, resources for many. But like a human body that only breathes in, that only inhales, if it doesn't exhale it back out like a human body, it dies, it expires. And so that responsibility for that reciprocal relationship of the taking in and then continuing into sharing and to reconnecting, I think is really important through sharing our stories and the ways in which we know the world as cultural people.
And yeah, I think that's well said. Yes. Much better
Thank
said
you.
than I could have.
Thank you. No.
Gosh, yeah. I mean, and yeah, this is one of those things that we could talk about this forever.
Right.
And if you're interested, you could come back and we could totally talk about it again.
I would love that.
But yeah, and I think if you guys listening are interested, go out and chase those stories and find new ones and learn. And
I think it's about being curious.
Yeah.
About being curious about your own culture. We have so many people that, you know, for Choctaw people, there are a lot of, you know, our members and others that, you know, maybe they're not a tribal member, but they have, you know, a connected heritage. And maybe they are a tribal member and did not grow up learning about Choctaw culture. They may have that one way, whatever way it is, talking to someone, going to visit, you know, places that are important culturally, and just being curious and learning. And it's just going out and talking like we are today.
Yeah. Yeah. Just
sharing.
Being willing and being open and just have on your listening ears.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you again, Gena, and you guys out there, go see the First Americans Museum, and yeah, we love you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
This chapter of Campbell's Corner was brought to you by the Possibilities Podcast platform.